Hello and welcome to the program. I am Folashade Ogurinde. Nigeria's economy in the first quarter of 2023 experienced some unprecedented upheavals, from the cash scarcity occasioned by the CBN's Naira redesign policy to the interest rate hike of 18%. The economic health of the nation has become more and more worrying. In its latest report, the National Bureau of Statistics disclosed that Nigeria's total public debt stock hit 46.25 trillion naira in the fourth quarter of 2022, growing by 4.96% in the quarter under review. Well, joining me to discuss this further is Segun Sopitan, Principal Partner at Woodridge and Scott Consulting. Thank you as always for joining us. Now, what do you make of CBN's hike in interest rate to 18%?
Well, thanks for having me. I had said in other public fora that increasing the monetary policy rate to 18% is not exactly a very good idea, even though one understands why they did it. But I had called for some caution with further increases in this rate, because the further you increase rates, the more you slow economic progress and growth down. The further you increase rates, the more you run the risk of stifling production, productivity, and all of that. The further you increase rates, the further you limit access to credit by sectors of the economy that need credit for them to grow. So yes, there's a need to moderate inflation, which increased further from February, from January to February. But I think that other policy measures need to come into play. We cannot continue to increase rates. It's notable that the number of basis points percentage increase, or number of basis point increase this time was reduced from 100 basis points to 50 basis points, which means that they are also realizing that they cannot continue to that very aggressive approach to the effort to tame inflation. But I think that, again, like I've said in the past, they need to stop now and look at other ways of tempering inflation. It's enough. Any further increases, we honestly run the risk of pushing the economy, into a recession, especially when you factor in other developments, within the country in the last 6 months.
Now, in what ways will the interest rate hike affect investors and manufacturers?
Well, something interesting, so from an investment point of view, that increase just for a short while, a short-term diversion of interest of investment from the capital market was experienced. So institutional investors moved their monies away from the capital market, which caused a slight devaluation, if you like, or depreciation in the value of the stock market. But that will adjust itself. It should be a short-term. For other players in the economy, the productive sector and all of that, like I said earlier, the challenge with this is there's going to be a constriction of credit, because this mops up liquidity from the system, within the banking system, and also because it increases the cost of access to credit. And that's not a good thing in a situation where we are still, let's not forget that we're still pushing to achieve more robust growth within the economy. When you remember that our annual growth rate, population-wise, is above 3%, having a GDP that is trending below 3% is not growth. We are not growing. So we are supposed to be pushing for growth in the region of 5, 6, maybe 7% in the medium term, and above 10% in the long term. So we cannot pursue policies that mitigate growth.
Well, let's talk about the exchange rate now. How do you think the interest rate hike will affect this sector of the economy?
The factors that affect exchange rates, to a certain degree, maybe, it can be argued that by increasing interest rates, you reduce money supply in a way, and therefore reduce the pressure on the naira exchange rate. That is only a small segment of the factors that affect our exchange rates. So no, I don't think we will see any significant moderating effect that this would cause. The pressure points that drive the value of our naira down against the dollar are far more than just availability of money. It's just simply a case of demand to satisfy our consumption and importation needs. So no, I don't think that this is going to have much of an impact.
Now, the CBN has justified its policies, saying raising interest rates would help tackle inflation. Do you share the Apex Bank's sentiment and optimism?
The inflation that we have in Nigeria is more of cost-push inflation. It's inflation that is being driven by a number of factors that affect just the cost of access to goods and services in the country. Logistic costs, security constraints, international supply chain challenges, all of those factors have played a role in driving us to where we are with inflation. So increasing the monetary policy rate by 500 basis points will not make much of a difference, in the inflationary pressures and trends that we have seen. And I think that this point is already evidentially available to us. The central bank has increased the monetary policy rate now consistently this was the 6th MPC meeting that increased the monetary policy rate, and yet inflation has continued to go up. So it's clear that it's not working. And when it's not working, you should do something else. And I want to believe that the MPC will see this and they will change strategy.
Well, we'll take a breather now, but Money Matters will be back shortly. To stay with us. Welcome back to the program. If you're just joining us, I've been talking to Segun Sopiton, Principal Partner at Woodridge and Scott Consulting, on some of Nigeria's burning economic issues. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, the federal government is expected to scrap fuel subsidy by mid-2023. In what ways will this affect CBN's control of inflationary pressure?
Very, very clearly and very obviously, once you take subsidy out, what automatically happens is that a fundamental input into the productive activities of the country, our economy, will have its costs increase significantly by over 350%. The players, the stakeholders within that sector have told us, there was news that came out yesterday and this morning, that once subsidy goes, we should expect pump price of petrol to trend around between 700 to 750, maybe 800 naira per litre. When you bear in mind that as I speak now, the average pump price is about 200 naira, you realize that that is potentially up to a 400% increase in an item that is a significant proportion of the cost of businesses and the cost of individuals in this country. When you combine that with increasing interest rates and what that could do to the cost of goods, you can only see this resulting in very, very serious inflationary pressures. And I think that because of that, it is unlikely that the federal government will go ahead with this policy. And I want to strongly advise that they do not. There are fundamental issues that must be addressed before subsidy removal begins to make sense. We understand the arguments in support of subsidy removal, but it cannot be done in isolation of the fundamental reasons why importation of petroleum is pretty much 100% in terms of satisfying our local consumption needs. So ability to refine products locally, for example, must be addressed before you can talk about subsidy removal. Another thing that can be addressed is the corruption within the subsidy system. If the government is able to fish out the people that are collecting subsidies without bringing any product in, then the subsidy volumes will go down. So removing the subsidies now without dealing with these issues will simply be transferring the costs of the inefficiencies of government to the citizens, and that will not be right. And as usual with nature, there will be a reaction. So I would suggest that given the political climate now, a removal of subsidy at this time would be a calamitous error, and it should be avoided.
Well, many have also argued that the federal government must provide its citizens with necessary economic drivers to cushion the adverse effects of fuel subsidy removal. But would these palliatives, so to speak, have any real impact?
Look, the Minister of Budget and National Planning came out 2 weeks ago to categorically declare to the Nigerian public that the government has not even commenced any conversation around providing palliative measures, that they are not, it's not something that they're contemplating. So the intention of government as we speak now, except if something changes tomorrow, the intention of government is to take the subsidy out without making any arrangements to cushion the negative effects. So I really don't understand what's driving this type of thinking. If you wanted to provide palliatives, you have to look at the cost components in the average Nigeria's say monthly spend, and look for a way to provide alternatives, either provide alternatives to those cost components or directly subsidize them, which again begs the question, why remove the subsidy in the first place? So if you take the subsidies out, what have you done about mass public transportation? Maybe trains or a larger availability of big buses that can move large numbers of people simultaneously. What about the cost of food, which would also be impacted, by subsidy removal? What about, there's so many other things that will be impacted directly by this thing, and the government ought to come out with a clear program that will deal with the short-term, very negative impact of increases in the cost of those items to Nigerians before they even talk about subsidy. But the Minister of National Planning has been very categorical that they are not making any such plans. So it remains to be seen how they want to navigate this very, very delicate matter.
Now, many thought leaders have argued that monies used for subsidy can be used for other important economic needs of the nation. How do you react to that argument?
I'm sure from everything I've said, you can see that I don't support subsidy removal. So that argument may look true on the face of it if you don't do a critical analysis and introspection. So the argument, for example, is that the subsidy bill for the 2023 budget, if it were to have been run for the entire year, will be around 6.7 trillion naira. In budgeting for only half of the year, the subsidy bill was 3.3 or 3.4 trillion naira, which means that technically speaking, the government could be saving around 3-point-something trillion naira by no longer paying subsidy. And then the proponents of this argument will tell you that, for example, as set debt service obligations in the 2023 budget stand at just about that 6 trillion naira threshold. So if you take subsidies out entirely, then that frees up money to, for example, service our debts. Of course, if you take subsidies out entirely, even if you're not servicing the debts, then you can deploy the money maybe into infrastructure projects, critical infrastructure in very critical sectors that would have an impact on the life of Nigerians.
Now, finally, before I let you go, the latest report on Nigeria's total public debt reveals a growth of 4.96%, hitting 46.25 trillion naira in Q4 2022. How serious is this development?
Look, I mean, there is absolutely no problem with a country having a high debt profile. Our problem is not the volume of debt. Our problem is that we do not generate enough productivity from that debt to create the cash flows required to pay that debt back. So we continue to pile up the debt, and our debt service to revenue ratio continues to get worse. As I speak now, our debt service to revenue ratio is already almost 100%. In other words, almost 100% of the revenues generated by the federal government goes into servicing of debt, and then we have to borrow more money to do everything else, including pay salaries. You know, that is our problem. It's not the debt in itself that's the problem, it's the application of debt. What activities are the government deploying this debt that we continue to pile up into, and how do those activities create enough productivity and revenue generating capacity or potential for the government to ensure that that increment in our debt profile will result in a commensurate increment in revenues. That is the challenge. And until we fix that challenge, we will continue to do this. I don't have any problem with us borrowing money. There is no problem in borrowing money, even though I also believe that there are better ways of financing some of the things that government finances with its debt. I don't think we've explored public and private partnerships adequately. I don't think we've adequately put in policy measures to attract private capital into the development space. So the debt is not the problem. It's what we do with the money.
Well, Segun Sopiton, Principal Partner at Woodridge and Scott Consulting, thank you as always for your insight. And it's a wrap on the program. See you again next time. I am Folashade Ogurinde. Bye for now.